Hello folks, hope you're doing alright. I've got a video here for you. This one is for the Sypheris Hill Mark IV. The one that I have pictured here right now is the Mark III version, and this one here in the background, that is the Mark IV. I'm going to shoot this video to try to give you a major changes between the two, and maybe you might want to go with a Mark III, or if any of you out there want me to release the Mark II design, which has even more simpler materials to craft it, I could release that onto Steam if you want. So let's start with the Mark III here, okay? Now, all the way around, I've tried to put chain guns or autocannons, as they might be called in game right now. I've tried to keep the armament fairly simplistic, and it's not necessarily all that desirable. It's just, it's there, okay? The shielding adequately covers pretty much everything, but the shield types that I use, I think for this one was GSO in some places, and as you can see over here, it was Hawkeye in some, so it kind of looks a little bit haphazard. I'm going to start with the resource bay on this side and try to work my way around. Okay, so the way this works is this is the receiving bay, and this portion right here, all these zigzags, is basically designed so that all these receivers can receive as much resources as possible, and then these zigzags will slow it down enough for the refiners here to have enough time to actually be able to refine it continuously, and then send it on up to the storage bay. Okay, so now we have covered the intake side, the refining side, and we're going to cover the furnace side here. Okay, now according to the item description, the geocore is supposed to be the most efficient, so I went ahead and went with those in this bay. Okay, over here, well, go through the filters first actually. Okay, so the way this should work is resources are received here, they're refined, or thanks to this filter, they'll be sent into the furnace bay. I've also got the refined versions of some of the fuel resources up here as well, because I prefer these two to come in, but what I found in testing is sometimes this thing would just get so flooded with a lot of the resources I put into it that it was just a better alternative to have all fuel resources go into here, whether they were refined or not. Now in this bay over here, it's more of a dual purpose. Okay, so not only does it handle selling of the overflow materials, fuel materials I should say, it's also the scrapping bay. Okay, I've got all the scrappers here from all of the corporations currently in game. You've got your Geocore, GSO, you've got Venture, and then you've got Hawkeye. Okay, so this is more designed of the perspective of maybe you need some block bucks, so you'll go into your inventory, you'll find whatever it is you want to scrap, and usually in my case it's the Hawkeye tank tracks, because I seldom ever use those in a tank design, and they're pretty prevalent in most techs that I wind up accumulating. So I will put those in there and then just generate some block bucks for myself. Okay, but some other people, they prefer to have multiple scrappers, so this is mostly just if you need some block bucks, really. Okay, so with that being covered, I'm going to go over to the storage. The intake side, you should receive these, goes pretty fast, gets refined, and then it's sent up into here. And with this, there's still an issue in game, which I believe is 7.8 right now on the stable build that I'm using, that even though there's enough room in the silos, it'll have this kind of herky-jerky back and forth action to where it's not sure if it should send out a resource or if it should keep it. I'm not going to be able to demonstrate that for you right now because in this next design, I've tried to do what I can to try to alleviate that situation. Excuse me. So with this design, it still has that issue to where from time to time you might have to double click, like so, if you saw that, to reverse the direction of the conveyors. And also over here as well is there's an issue with the game right now that sometimes you go into a fabricator, you tell it to make a part, and then even though you might have the right resources for it, it won't display the components that you're needing to create for it. So you'd have to double click on the conveyor over here or over here to get it to display. Okay, so hopefully what I've done in this next one that I'm going to show you here in a little bit, the Mach 4 one instead of this Mach 3, is I've been able to design around that as best I can. Okay, so you have the storage bay, nothing to it there. You've got all the lot silos there, and you've also got probably, I think, the bulk of the solar generators is located in the section as well. Now, in the crafting section, you have 4 component factories, and you have all of the fabricators as well as fabricators on this side here, as well as the scrappers on this side. Okay, your Hawkeye, Venture, Geocore, and GSO, and then for your scrappers, Hawkeye, Venture, GSO, and Geocore right here. The payload terminals on this model, I really just placed them where I could. You've got the Geocore over here, and then the rest of them you've got right here for Hawkeye, here for Venture, and then over here GSO. A little bit hard to find if you don't know what you're looking for. And also another problem that I had with this is I really didn't like how haphazard it with some of these defenses, these weapons were set up. So I alleviated some of that in the Mark IV design here. Okay, so that's just about it. All 4 bays explained. So here is the Mark IV. Very similar resource bay here, but this one, what I did is I included another row of GSO batteries here and armored them as best we could, and doing so allowed me to put enough of these Geocore receivers all flat down and not have to contort them at all, still keeping the same zigzag style conveyors there. And instead of having the Hawkeye scrappers, I went with, if you can see it well enough in here, I went with the GSO refineries. Okay, still does the same thing. You still got 3 refineries in there, and this time on top of it, what I did is as you can easily see, I put all of these solar generators, as well as I changed this up a little bit and gave it some better shielding and another Hawkeye repair bubble. Okay, now over here in the furnace bay, just like the other one, the filters are set up the same way for the same materials, so all this functions the exact same way. Okay, and let's see here. Yeah, I don't think I changed that. Okay, so what I did do is I also added a bunch of solar generators. Okay, I also, in this particular section, I changed up the armaments, the armor plating, and the defenses, as you can see. On this side, I took out all of the chain guns because they were just, for the damage that they did and the space that they took up, it just wasn't working for me. So I went with the Geocore. I believe this is a ladder design. Let me see here if I can get the right name for that. Okay. Here. There we go. Okay. The brew girder. Okay, so the girder blocks. Okay. So I use the girder blocks to give the GSO missile pods here some distance, because a lot of the times I will wind up mounting Sypheris Hill on an elevated position, so this way they're not having to shoot from right here. They've got a little bit of an elevation to where the missiles can fire out and then down. What else do we have here? The orbital cannon from Geocore I kept the same. It was doing okay. If I might do a Mark V, I might replace this with maybe like 4 or 5 of the GSO. I think I could get like 4 of the GSO in there, and if I was scrapping, it could process it a little bit faster. But with all the armor plating that I have from Geocore, I try to keep as much of it Geocore as I could to try to keep the design looking a little bit more uniform. Okay, so we've covered here the scrapping bay, furnace bay, the refinery bay, and the receiving bay. Okay, now one thing that I think most folks could easily tell is I obviously added these pillars here, armor plated them, and then added missiles on top of them. Same thing here. I took off a lot of these stun lasers, or excuse me, stud lasers here. Added some better shielding, some repair bubbles. Try to get that covered as much as I could throughout this entire thing with the Hawkeye shields and repair bubbles. The armor plating from Geocore all the way around. The wireless chargers, because even though they are slower than a lot of the other chargers, they have better distance. Over here in the storage bay, what I was talking about with 3 in the Mark III design is you still have the, I think they call it bottlenecking. It's this herky-jerky to where it's not sure if it should give or send a resource, so it just keeps doing this back and forth. I've tried to solve that as best I can with adding these 4 silos instead of the larger ones and putting conveyors to run in between. So now that you should have conveyors touching every silo, and unlike this one over here, you actually had silos that weren't even touching some conveyors. It restricts the amount of product, amount of resources that you can store, but I felt overall, since this is mostly a kind of craft on demand, scrapped on demand type base, it still works, because you're only going to be using, as far as resources, you're only going to be using what you can scrap to be able to create. Speaking of which, both craft and create or buy is this bay over here. I call it the crafting bay, but you've also got the payloads terminals, and on this version I've got their placement a lot better situated. They're all 4 right here, and you don't have to look for them amongst this other. I also replaced the megaton cannons with the GSO pods because I like the damage and how fast they fire in comparison to the megaton cannons, and they take up the exact same space. So that was kind of a no-brainer for me. Similarly, what I did with over here is I just had these shields exposed, and I just had the megaton cannons. I came up with an idea, and as it turned out, perfect placement for the shock panels from Geocore, and I also put the missile pods from GSO on there because, again, I just felt like they were a better weapon than the megaton cannons. Over here, I tried to make the fabricator for Hawkeye look a little bit more distinct and kind of make a little bit of a turret out of it so it wouldn't be difficult to miss. And it's still... that's one of the downsides, I think, of this design. It can be a little bit hard to bring up, but I didn't put any solar generators on this, so it'd be a little bit easier to get your mouse button in there to click wherever it is you want your mouse to be. Whereas over here, I intentionally put solar generators on a few things because you're not going to have to be getting in there and having to mess with that. you should be able to load as many resources as you possibly can in here without it clogging up. The only issue I've experienced is this bottlenecking that's still an issue. Crafting station is all worked out. The one bug that I talked about with sometimes it not displaying what components you're trying to craft, or it's not displaying what part that you're trying to make, you're just going to double right click on the conveyor belts. But as is, you shouldn't have any of those issues. So just let me know in the comments section of the video if you have experienced any problems with this design, because I've done everything that I can to try to figure out to make this as all-in-one, as inclusive as possible. So if you like what you see, leave a like, and I've also got this thing up on Steam Workshop. Try it out. Let me know if you like it. Just the one last thing here is they came out with some specialty blocks, and I don't have any designs that really feature them, so I'm like, why not? And I even put some roasters on there for some giggles. Alright folks, well, you take care, and you have a good one.